Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Zoom interview, another geologist, another day. Today we have geologist Kellie Wall, Dr. Kellie Wall from Cascades Volcano Observatory, USGS. Kellie, how's the weather in Portland today or Vancouver, Washington?
In Vancouver, it is sort of on and off today. We had snow last week, which was really fun for my dog to play in, but it's melted now. We had some rain off and on today, so back to typical West Side weather.
Well, thank you. And thank you for coming into the office on a Monday afternoon. So wonderful to have you here. Let's get right into it. We talked to Don Swanson, USGS, longtime USGS geologist, about 6 months ago, Kellie, and he mentioned that he was in the middle of some mapping in the Goat Rocks, and then he changed to working at Hawaii Volcano Observatory and then just kind of stopped his project. And when he heard that you were starting to work in the Goat Rocks, maybe 10 years ago, something like that, he just gave a bunch of stuff to you and got you rolling. Is that accurate? And if so, what did he give you to get you rolling with the project?
Yeah, that's totally accurate. I would not be where I am without the help of Don Smelton. He had done so much mapping work in the area over decades, really,
Yeah.
in the 80s and 90s. And then mid 1996, I think, is when he moved to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory and started his career there. And a lot of the mapping work that he had been working on in the Goat Rocks area had to be paused. And so he had a ton of field maps, some uh, open file reports,
Yep.
some of which were published and some of which were almost ready to be published, and a ton of field notes. I wish I had it with me, but I have this stack of field notes that he brought to me in person at an AGU meeting or something, and that I've got tons of highlighting through all of his very detailed notes from his many seasons of fieldwork in that area. So, and in addition to that, a lot of geochemical analyses of the
Mm.
different rock units and descriptions from thin sections. So it was like multiple PhDs of work already there for me to have a leg up on. So
Wonderful. And so, what year was this that you started this project? You started working in the Goat Rocks.
yeah, this was 2015, fall
Okay.
2015 when I started my PhD at OSU.
PhD. So it was your PhD advisor that connected you to Don, or how did you connected to him? And then what were the questions, or what was the state of general knowledge of the Goat Rocks volcano in 2015 when you got started?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Actually, my advisor, Anita Grunder, and I got really interested in this area because I think the previous spring, she and her family had done a family vacation backpacking trip through the Goat Rocks area. I think they stayed at Heart Lake. And she didn't really know much about the area at that time, but she was seeing all these amazing volcanic rocks that were deeply exposed by the glaciers in this area. And so she proposed that as something that we could look into for a potential project. And we turned to Wes Hildreth's 2007 Quaternary Cascades book to see what we could learn. And it was somewhat limited at the time. There was an understanding from Don and other previous researchers that there was a Pliocene and Pleistocene uh, either series of volcanoes or large volcano there. But a lot of the details were still kind of open ended. And so
Yeah.
we were really interested in coming in and clarifying some of the geochronology so we could better understand the timeline of how the units were erupted and what that complex looked like over time.
Well, I mean, full disclosure, I've been teaching a little bit about the Goat Rocks over the last 15 years, and without knowing you or Hen or anyone associated, and really didn't even know Don at the time, I was just teaching like, look, here's this volcano called the Goat Rocks Volcano near White Pass that's like got its head lopped off from erosion. It's
Yeah.
been dead for 500,000 years, but it was active for the 2 million years before that. And it's different than these other ghost volcanoes because there's still a stump of this thing left, but otherwise it's got no chance of erupting. It's way more complicated than that. Um, And so, what questions did you pose with Anita, your advisor, at the start of your PhD project? And did you get answers to those questions?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Let's see. We were interested in whether it was one volcano or multiple
Hmm.
volcanoes, and we sort of had a clue from a lot of Don's mapping that the compositions varied so much that it might have been multiple different systems.
Yeah.
And we were wondering about the timing and if there were multiple volcanoes, were they separated by large amounts of time, or was it sort of a continuous system? And we did get answers to those questions through some time in the field and a lot of geochemical work to define different compositional units, and then the geochronology to define the age ranges of these different centers. So we know now that there were four major composite volcanoes. Those were the Tieton Peak volcano, Bear Creek Mountain, which fed the Tieton andesite lava flows, and Lake Creek volcano and Old Snowy Mountain. Those are the four main. There are some other smaller vents too. And those were active between about 3 million years ago and about 100,000 years ago. So quite a broad range of ages.
Well, maybe it's pushing it too much, Kelly, but like Don thought there was one, and you ended up saying no, there's actually four.
Well,
Is it
I think Don had an inkling that there were multiple. He defined
okay?
a Goat Rocks volcano, which then we ended up calling the Lake Creek volcano. So it's all like semantics
I
in terms of
see.
the names. But he
Right.
did distinguish Old Snowy Mountain
Hmm.
from the Lake Creek volcano, or yeah,
Okay.
what we now call Lake Creek. But prior to that, there was uncertainty about where those Titan andesite lavas came from, for
Yes.
example. So those were linked to a greater Goat Rocks volcano. And Don, his work on the chemistry of some of those Goat Rocks volcano lavas matched or were similar to the Titan andesite. So there was still some uncertainty about exactly the sources of those things. But my colleague Daryl Gussie, who you know well, and in his work with John Lasher and Paul Hammond, they identified Bear Creek Mountain as the source of those lavas. So that started to piece together the story a little bit before I started my PhD.
Thank you. You're doing great. Thank you. This is always fun to talk to you. Now, I know you've got a few images, figures, maps, charts that maybe can flesh out a little bit of detail. And this is great timing for me because I do want to devote two letters here at the end of the alphabet to the Goat Rocks project. And I need to bone up. So why not learn directly from the person who broke out a bunch of these units and put these maps together? So please share your screen, Kelly, and let's just,
Sure.
I'll go wherever you want to go here for a few minutes. And occasionally I might interrupt you and ask you to, we can go back to our two heads and just go back and forth a bit more. But I'd love to see what you have for us today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Okay, so let me start here with just an index map that shows, I'm going to share that,
Thank you.
the location of the Goat Rocks Volcanic Complex relative to the rest of the southern Washington Cascades region. Can you see my mouse here, Nick?
I can.
Okay, great. So the Goat Rocks Volcanic Complex is this cluster of light gray triangles and little circles here. So these are composite volcanoes and smaller vents within this dashed purple line. So that's what we call the Goat Rocks Volcanic Complex, which is, we defined the footprint of that area based on the extent of andesitic and dacitic intermediate composition volcanoes that are then surrounded by these mafic volcanoes. So we call those the Goat Rocks Mafic Suite. That's kind of the focus of some more recent work that I've been doing. But this is Goat Rocks. It's just a little bit north of Mount Adams on the axis of the Cascade Arc. So from south to north, we have Hood and Adams, and then Goat Rocks. And out to the west are Rainier, St. Helens, Indian Heaven. We've got the Simcoe Mountains volcanic field to the southeast. And that is a volcanic field that was active during the same period as Goat Rocks. So at the early time that Goat Rocks was initiating, around 3 million years ago, we had
Mhm.
Simcoe Mountains volcanic field active, and also a volcano near Mount Hood. But elsewhere in the Cascade Arc during that time, there really wasn't a lot of volcanic activity known. So Goat Rocks was a major player at that time during the late Pliocene, early Pleistocene.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Bonus points for having purple here. That's our color for the last 10 million years.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, I didn't even realize. Perfect.
I can't hold it. I remember having this thought when I was out there filming with you guys last summer. Is there a chance that your Goat Rocks Mafic Suite is not a local Goat Rock story, but more of a broadly regional boring volcanic story that's all across the map?
I think that you're onto something there. So the boring volcanic field is defined by this area west of Mount Hood. So that's kind
Mhm.
of a distinct volcanic field that has its own age range. But throughout the Cascade Arc, especially from southern Washington through Oregon, there are all of these distributed volcanic vents that tend to be mafic.
Yeah,
So they're shorter lived volcanoes. A lot of them may be monogenetic volcanoes. So that is, I would say, a representation of sort of the ambient volcanic processes. And then the curiosity that I and others have is how you then go from that distributed mafic volcanism to establishing a major, more
yeah,
felsic
yeah.
volcanic center. So I think there's still questions to be answered in that realm. But
Because
yeah, we
if I'm
go
hearing
ahead.
you correctly, so the mafic stuff is happening before, during, and after the cones at Goat
Yes,
Rocks?
exactly. Yeah, so
Oh,
during each stage, which maybe I should move on to another figure
yeah,
here that shows
good,
this more clearly.
good.
Let me stop this share and I'll
Yeah,
go to the
yeah.
next one. Um, During each stage of the Goat Rocks Felsic Center, so I've shown four main stages here: the Titan Peak stage, Bear Creek Mountain, Lake Creek, and then Old Snowy here. So
Hmm.
again, the purple is the Goat Rocks Volcanic Complex, and then the nearby Mafic vents are shown in the darker purplish blue color. So
Thank
during
you.
each stage, there is a mafic volcano active at the same time or very close in time to that more evolved eruptive center. So um, it seems like we can get a good sense of what's happening kind of in the mantle, feeding into this system through time, ultimately driving volcanism at that central complex.
Okay, can you stop your share for a sec? This gives
Yeah.
me a new thought. New for me, not new for you, I'm sure. Like I'm thinking of the major cones we have now. Are there satellite active mafic vents tied to those cones, or any kind of a relationship today with the cone you can think of that is analogous to what we were looking at on your maps for Goat Rocks?
Yeah, it really varies cone by cone. The different major volcanic centers in southern Washington sort of have different personalities. So
Yeah,
at St. Helens, there's not much of a mafic field around it.
right.
St. Helens actually erupted mafic compositions, basalts and basaltic andesites, through its summit
Okay.
during the Castle Creek period. And there is a shield volcano to the southeast, and I'm blanking on its name. I think it might be Marble Mountain. Um,
Okay.
and I don't think it's known. I don't think the age of that is constrained well enough to know if that was coeval with St. Helens early stages or not. So
Hmm.
there's that end member, and then Mount Adams, for example, does have lots of satellite mafic vents around it that have erupted, on and off coevally with the central volcano.
Right, right. So it might be the Goat Rock scene may have been similar to Mount Adams today
Yeah, I think that's fair
with
to
those
say.
relations. Yeah. Huh. Okay.
Yeah,
You can see what I do. I oversimplify, but I'm just trying to grab things that would resonate, and that does kind of resonate. Just trying to get a mental, trying to get a visual of that Goat Rock scene, and I can't just think of one cone now, Kelly. I got to think of four different chapters.
yep,
So if we can go back to your four
sure.
quadrants there, let's just keep thinking about that. And I'm just
Yeah,
thinking of the viewers and myself trying to process this in real time. So
yeah.
this is great. Yeah. So we're just so there's a similarity, just as I'm just verbalizing now. There's kind of is there mafic chapters right along with the more silicic chapters in all four quadrants primarily, or not?
Yes, yeah, there is.
Yeah,
So in this first stage, when we have Tieton Peak volcano, actually,
yeah,
let me go back. Before
good.
the Tieton Peak volcano, the
Okay.
story begins with mafic volcanism at the Miriam Creek volcano. So this was mostly mafic, some intermediate compositions volcano. It's actually underneath the Hogback Mountain volcano that developed
Oh, okay.
later. So
Yeah, yeah.
first thing we had here was the Miriam Creek mafic volcano, then Tieton Peak and this other mafic volcano, Devil's Wash Basin, were active at the same time. Their lavas actually are intercalated with each other.
Hmm.
Then what I want to point out is there's a big time gap between this first panel and the second here.
Yeah.
2.1 million years is the youngest known lava that we have, and actually that is kind of an isolated island of andesite that we don't know where the source is. So there's kind of some missing information at the end of this period. And
Hmm.
then it's not until 1.6 million years ago that Bear Creek Mountain begins erupting those Titan andesite lavas. And along with that, there's the QOB1 and QOB2 lavas, which are quaternary, olivine, basalt, and basaltic andesite lavas.
Hmm.
And following that, then we have the Lake Creek volcano, this major volcano, which you could think of as the quintessential Goat Rocks volcano. That's what Don described in a lot of his mapping.
I
So
see.
we call it Lake Creek now. Nearby, there is at Sispus Pass. If you've been up there, anyone else watching, there's this shallow intrusion there, which suggests that there was maybe another vent located a little to the southeast.
Hmm.
So, two volcanoes very close to each other during this time, and also the Hogback Mountain shield volcano became active, and that erupted hundreds of lava flows, as we saw when we were together in the field in August. So, during
Hmm.
this stage, major composite volcano and major shield volcano pumping out basalts. So, that was a kind of a climactic period of this complex. And then
Well, I think,
finally,
yeah.
there's the Old Snowy Mountain and surrounding volcanoes at much later time, like Wallop Lake and Lakeview Mountain vents. And then also farther to the northeast are Tumac Mountain and some other vents, which I kind of have not paid as much attention to. I consider
Yeah.
those the White Pass volcanics, and there's it could be argued whether or not those are related to the Goat Rock system or not. But that's a summary of Goat Rocks through the ages.
Love it. And still looking at these four maps together, is there, what kind of trends do we have? Geochemical trends from plate A to plate D?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we increasing silica? Is there the volume of the magma is increasing? Can you say anything just kind of story arc wise from 3.5 to the late Pleistocene?
Yes, I think it's very interesting. In panel A here, this earliest time, there's a really broad range of compositions. So, and I should have
Mm,
mentioned too, during this time, the Devil's Horns rhyolite erupted. So we
there we
have
go.
everything from basalt to rhyolite erupting during this period, a very broad range. And then when we move into panel B, we've got these basalts and basaltic andesites, but the main cone erupting here, the Bear Creek Mountain volcano, is erupting a very small range of compositions that are alkalic andesites. You could call those tracky andesite compositions.
Hmm.
So the
Hmm.
most potassic and sodium rich andesite lavas in a very restricted range of compositions. So we go from very broad range to very narrow range of compositions. And then during the Lake Creek stage in panel C here, we have overlap with Bear Creek Mountain, but extending to a little bit more felsic and a little bit less potassic, so slightly changing in composition. And finally, during Old Snowy Mountain stage, there's a very different, distinct range of lower potassium andesites, extending again to more felsic compositions, including rhyolite. So it kind of goes from broad range, narrow range to broad range again.
Thank you. Can you stop your share? I've got a couple more questions. This is
Yes,
fun. This is fun.
I think so too.
Is that typical? Like if we're thinking of a generic stratocone in the Pacific Northwest, Shasta or whomever, do you think, 4 or 5 chapters and some of these narratives that we just mentioned for Goat Rocks? Is it possible for all cones to have something like that? And is Goat Rocks a unique situation where we can just tear into this thing and see all 4 chapters, and there's no chance to see the 4 chapters with cones that are totally gone or cones that are mostly still there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Goat Rocks is sort of a perfect scenario where we have a lot of volcanic history, 3 million years of history that is exposed by glaciers, so we can step through those different time periods. And we don't have that same situation at a place like Mount Rainier or Mount Adams, where older activity is buried by the newer eruptions. But also at places like that, there's not as much of an older history, so we might sort of be at the beginning of the life cycles of those volcanic
Right,
loci.
right.
Um, and so it's hard to say if Goat Rocks and its life story is representative or not of these other centers. But one thing that's really interesting to me is that the different periods of Goat Rocks are similar to different individual volcanoes. So, like, the Bear Creek Mountain stage compositions are more similar to Mount Adams, whereas Old Snowy Mountain is more similar to Mount St. Helens. So, still not totally sure why
Right,
that is,
right.
but it's a really interesting pattern.
I love that. I love a little snapshot for each of your 4 snapshots. We've got current cones that might be in those different stages. I'll think more about that. That works for
Yeah.
me. How about just some general stuff, and then maybe we'll go to a couple more of your figures. You weren't doing all your PhD sitting in a lab, I'm guessing. You were out there doing some field work, right? So how did you gather the data necessary to tell the story we just looked at with those 4 purple quadrants that you were showing us?
Yeah. Well, going off of Don's field maps was the first step,
Yeah,
like knowing where to go to target those units. And so I studied his maps and notes in a lot of detail to learn about the different compositions that he described and then target, okay, this area shows a transition. There's a boundary between this unit and this one that have different compositions. Let's go there, sample either side, and define that age boundary. And so we did that in locations all over the Goat Rocks area, but we did not go everywhere. So we
right.
definitely did not cover as much ground as Don did in his work. But yeah, having his maps as a foundation really helped us go and kind of update details here and there.
I wonder what your dissertation would have looked like if you didn't have Don's work. And Anita and
I
Anita
know.
just said, let's have you start working on the goat rocks. And like, well, we got this one project from Washington State, Ellington or something like that in the late
Yeah,
60s.
Ellington, right.
Uh, and if that was all you had, maybe just a fraction of what you've been able to find would
Yeah,
have happened.
exactly. I think that's really fair to say. Um, it's an interesting thought experiment to think if I had gone and mapped this area independently, how different would my map be from Dawn's
Yeah.
and how far behind would I be?
Right. No.
Yeah, and there's a lot of areas where I was amazed at the work that Dawn did to put together the story, and seeing it there on the ground, it was very abstract to me. But then, you know, panning out and looking at this map, oh yeah, that structure makes sense. So, yeah, really grateful for the help that he gave me.
How about one more with the Don angle, and then we'll move on to a couple more figures. This is very interesting to me. Um, were you keeping Don Swanson updated on your progress each field season? And were you asking for advice, or did he suggest, oh, you found that there? Well, then maybe that changes what I thought, and maybe you should go over here. Or did he just say, here you go, here's what I was doing, and good luck to you?
He gave me a ton of materials up front, and then we had a lot of back and forth
You
initially.
did.
Yeah, and then after each field season, I probably could have been better at keeping Don
Oh yeah, no, that's
updated.
fine. That's fine.
But yeah, we did
No,
have some back and forth over the years where I would come to him and have photos of a field area and how did you interpret this weird feature that I'm
Right.
seeing? And he would
Right.
remember and try to give me his own interpretation. So
Okay.
yeah, that was nice.
Well, well, it's you. You did the work. You took us a major step forward, more than one, to understand the complexities and the four stories from the Goat Rocks. And so I guess before I lose the thought, that could have been the end. Like you just wrapped up that Goat Rocks thing and you could have been onto something else, but you're still
Hmm.
working on the Goat Rocks with a new
Yeah,
colleague. So
can't get away from it.
how did that come about? Did you hear that Hannah moved here and you thought, oh, I should figure out who this person is and see if she wants to keep working on Goat Rocks, or did she contact you? How did that work?
Yeah, so Hannah and I connected when I was still a grad student at Oregon State University, and she was a postdoc there working with Adam Kent. And so we had, she had seen some of my presentations about the goat rocks and got interested in the story of the Devil's Horns rhyolite in particular, because she has this background in studying rhyolite systems. And so when she started at Central, we happened to be at an IAVC meeting in New Zealand together, and we were chatting, and she suggested that she was interested in getting involved in the Goat Rocks area for some research because the location was so accessible
Yes.
from where she is, where you guys are. And I loved the idea that somebody else could continue this work that I still barely scratched the surface of. And
Right.
so, yeah, we went from there. Hannah took the lead on submitting an NSF proposal. I weighed in a little bit on that, but that was mostly her. And that was successfully funded, thankfully.
Yes.
And so now she has students who are working on projects right now, focusing more on the older history of that center, which I barely touched by the end of my time because it took several field seasons before I could get to some of these harder to access areas. And
Ah,
so, really, that older part of the story, I hadn't really fleshed out. And so, her students are picking up where I left off.
excellent. Um, well, we could call it good here, Kelly, or if you felt like a couple other maps or charts that you have might take us one more step with our
Sure.
discussion. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm happy to keep going. I
Good.
know that you've been interested in how far the Columbia River basalts may have advanced into the Cascades area. And so I have a couple of things that I thought I could show that might help flesh out that story. So um,
Love it. Love it.
let me
Thank
show
you.
you a map of the Goat Rocks area that I've been working on updating. And I should mention that all of these figures I've been showing today are still in progress for a publication that I'm hoping to get back to the journal very soon. But some little
Okay.
tweaks will be made to these.
Yep.
So
So
just FYI.
they're very good.
So let me orient you here. We're looking at the Goat Rocks area. The core of it here is Old Snowy Mountain, and then um, kind of the Lake Creek volcano area. Here's Devil's Wash Basin, and Hogback Mountain is this blue unit here. So this is a map that is highlighting the mafic units in blue, and then the more felsic units in shades of gray.
Thank you.
White Pass is up to the north here, somewhere here. I think it actually goes through here. Yeah, south
Yeah.
of Spiral Butte. Um, and so, one thing that we've been really curious about is over here in the Devil's Horns rhyolite deposit. Um, when Hannah and I and some other colleagues, I think we were with Daryl and John that summer too, we sampled some material from that deposit, and there are these cobbles of basalt in
Mhm.
the rhyolite. And I don't know if Hannah has geochemistry back for those samples, but I'm hoping she will soon, and really excited to see what she finds. Because there's a question: could those cobbles of basalt be Columbia River basalt, or are they something else? And my suspicion, my theory is that they're actually from this unit TEB, this sort of blue striped unit here. This is Eocene basalt,
Mm.
which Don and maybe Jeff Clayton,
Hmm.
correlated to the Summit Creek basalt, which
Yes.
um, you guys have talked about on this channel quite a bit. And so that extends here and is truncated by the Devil's Horns rhyolite, presumed caldera boundary here. And
Yes.
so I'm assuming that those cobbles will be found to match the composition of this Eocene basalt. But it's still an open question. So I'm really excited to hear about the data that Hannah gets back.
I like that, and I don't know how much of a huge story that would be necessarily. Like if she said, "Holy cow, this geochemistry has to be Columbia River basalt and not the basalt of Summit Creek," would that be
Mm-hmm.
big news to you? I mean, it's kind of a curiosity for us in our series, but how
Yeah.
significant would be that? How significant would that be if it was basalt that was Miocene in age?
I
Is that a
think
big deal?
I think it would be a big deal because nowhere else in this area is Columbia River basalt mapped.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the Ohanapikosh volcanics and other things of, Oligocene to early Miocene time.
Yeah.
And then farther to the east, in the river valley of the Titan River, where the Titan andesites are, um, there's exposure of Columbia River basalts there. But
Yeah.
farther west here in the Goat Rocks area, we don't have any exposed. So that would be a big surprise.
It'd be fun. Yeah.
It
Now,
would.
also during this winter with the alphabet, Daryl started emailing some of us and said, "Hey, man, I think the basalt of Discovery Creek might be the same as the basalt of Summit Creek. Is the basalt of Discovery Creek on this map here?"
That I think is a bit farther east of the edge
Okay.
of this map. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have it
Okay.
here. But yeah, I was really excited to hear that from
Yeah.
Daryl too, that this Eocene basalt extends farther across this region. So that story, yeah, from farther north of White Pass all the way through the Goat Rocks area, this
Yeah.
kind of, I guess it's a slab breakoff story. I'm not an expert on that, but it's really fascinating.
Well, thank you. And thank you for kind of leaning into what we've been talking about lately. But there must be a bigger or different reason for this map and what you're trying to do with all these mafic units. What's the narrative you're working on here with this
Yeah,
figure?
yeah. So this is just showing the details of those units I showed in the four panel figure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the different colors here are from older to younger. So
Mm.
the yellow is this oldest Miriam Creek volcano, and then we've got the Devil's Wash Basin volcano in this sort of light green color. QOB2 is off here to the edge, this sort of teal color, and then QOB1 is off the map. But this map shows the present day extent of these different units. And you can see, like, for example, at Devil's Wash Basin, there's really not a lot left of those units, this tiny
Right.
little part of the map. And so
Yeah.
that's been a challenge for us to reconstruct these stories of the volcanoes from these little puzzle pieces that are left. So that's
Right.
been a really um, interesting project. So yeah, this is work in progress, and this is a simplified map. So there's a lot more details in these older
Jeez.
units that isn't shown here that Don has on his open file report maps. So anyone can go to those for all the juicy details.
Sure. I have to ask, what's up with the Goat Rock seismic zone coming right through the map?
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's a concentration of earthquakes that go through this area, and they go right past Hotback Mountain, kind of through the Titan Peak area, and then right at the edge of this Devil's Horns rhyolite. So this is a little bit speculation on my part, but I wonder
Right.
how much the location of those volcanoes may be controlled by these bigger structural things,
Mm.
and whether there's a deep fault zone there that is controlling where the magmas are able to ascend. And why is this here? Is it a boundary between two different crustal
Yeah.
compositions? I don't
Right.
know, but
Uh,
yeah, it's an interesting correlation here between the volcano locations and that seismic zone.
Thank you, Kelly. If you wouldn't mind stopping your share, we can just
Yeah,
wrap this one up. Hopefully painless enough for you, really fun for me.
good.
Um,
Thanks,
I'm
Vic.
working, I think in this last few couple of letters, I want, well, I know that I have folks who are viewers who have been busy toiling away, making a big list of all the calderas in the Cascades, let alone the Washington Cascades. And I don't think we'll do this, but feels like so many of these places that have some kind of volcanic activity, whether it's modern or in the past, in the Cascades, seems like there's always some kind of caldera nearby. There's a pluton and there's some volcanics. And whether it's all back in the 20s or back in the 30s or today, like,
Hmm.
is there a pluton, first of all, within your mapping area that is exposed anywhere? And then also, do you think this holy trinity where we have caldera, pluton, and volcanics is a thing? Like there's so many places where all three of those things usually pop up in the same place at roughly the same time?
Yeah, so I guess maybe to clarify, are you talking about plutons and volcanic activity that are coeval or close in time, or places where volcanism recurs over and over again?
I think I'm cartoonishly thinking about a with this long history of the Cascade Volcanic Arc, you've got a 2 or 3 million year span where you've got some activity, and you've
Yeah,
got stratovolcano activity and plenty of different volcanics, BADR, the whole thing. But
yeah.
if you look carefully, there's also a pluton in that same vintage somewhere, and there's a caldera somewhere in that same vintage as well. And I
Mm,
don't know about the caldera forms and then the pluton comes in beneath or whatever, but I think I learned that from the Hammond work and all that Paul Hammond work he's got. And I don't know if there's a general relationship between these three things that before this winter have been just kind of random thoughts to me: caldera, Pluton, volcanics. Is there a Pluton in Goat Rocks?
well, there are shallow intrusions, like I mentioned at Sispus Pass, so maybe that's
Okay.
kind of the upper part of a pluton, and folks, other researchers have called it the Sispus Pass pluton.
Huh.
So how deep that extends, how extensive it is not well defined right now. There have been gravity and aeromagnetic surveys across this area that identified denser material, a gravity high, sort of to the northwest of the core of the Goat Rocks area. And that
Huh.
has been interpreted as potentially representing a Goat Rocks pluton. But I think that might actually represent some of these older plutonic rocks that were in place during the Oligocene and early Miocene, just because the location of that matches up so well. And it's a little bit offset from the
I see.
younger Goat Rock Center.
Yeah.
So still, up in the air a little bit, but there is plutonic rock exposed at Sispus Pass. So, and it makes sense for there to have been establishment of a major, intrusive system feeding this volcano because you had to have these magmas differentiating within the crust.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the relationship between these caldera rhyolite eruptions and the establishment of these andesite stratovolcanoes is really fascinating to me. Like
Yeah.
at Baker, we have the early rhyolites before establishment of that volcano. So what's the story there?
Well, you can tell where I'm coming from. Like I want to teach some major narratives. I want to have some sort of relationships that nobody has been able to see before. And then suddenly, oh my God, yeah, we're looking. We've got these glasses, and we're looking all through the Cascades. We can see this thing, but you know the detail, and you know it's not that simple. And this is how we'll finish, Kelly. I know you have multiple goals and questions in the proposal that Hannah and you wrote.
Yeah.
What's one question you're particularly excited about with this current project? And do you think that you'll get an answer for the
Oh,
question you're excited about?
yeah, that's a big question. Let me think about what questions we proposed in this proposal that we submitted a while ago. One thing, I may not be able to define this eloquently, but one thing I'm really excited about what Hannah's students are working on is um, digging into the detailed petrologic history of these magmas. And that was something that I didn't really touch during my time there. Um, so trying to understand the relationships between these different units that erupted, like the Devil's Horns rhyolite, the Devil's Wash Basin basalt, the Tieton Peak volcano, do those represent a related magmatic system that evolved over time, or are they totally independent magma reservoirs? And so Hannah's students are going to be digging into the compositions of the minerals that were erupted and looking for links between these different units
Hmm.
and investigating whether there's crossover, whether minerals from one magma were then picked up by another magma at one of these other volcanoes. So
Yeah,
with the work that her group has done at other places like at Mount Baker, I think that they will be successful in identifying whether or not there are relationships between those volcanoes. So yeah, I have a lot of confidence in what they'll be able to learn with those techniques.
excellent. Kellie Wall, thank you for your time this afternoon. Please hold the line. I'm going to stop the record button and we'll chat for a couple more
Okay,
minutes.
great.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Nick.
much. Bye.